Hey everyone, Robyn Openshaw here, and welcome to your TAF Insiders Mastermind. We might also share this on the podcast because I think tonight's going to be really great. And this is a subject that I think is super important. We're going to talk about sustainable gardening. We're going to talk about perennial gardening. We're going to talk about permaculture. And something I've only learned recently is hugelkulture, but I'm going to give you the backstory for why we're talking about what we are tonight. And I think that this is a really, really important topic. Maybe one of the most important topics that we've talked about in the last 2 years since I founded Take Action for Freedom. But just a couple of quick things I want to bring you guys up to speed on from my research from the last week is that the United States is apparently trying to stop American investment in China, like literally ban American individuals and corporations from investing in China. And remember that in most industries, China is producing like 90% of our manufactured goods. So this is absolutely earth-shattering for the US to be in, we've been in sort of a trade war with China, but this is about to get a lot worse. So every analyst I listen to says there's no way out of this, even in the short term, without a bunch more money printing. So, money printing is going to be the way that we avert the next major depression. And if they do that, that is, of course, inflationary. War is also inflationary, and we're basically fighting a proxy war in Ukraine, and most people think that we are going to head into a new whole level of war with China. And so both of those things are very inflationary. And so, think we have to ask ourselves, how interested would we be in planting? Next week, we're going to talk about tower gardening. We're going to talk about indoor gardening. We're going to talk about what if you don't own a backyard? What if you live in an apartment? What if all you have is a sunny window? And I'm going to get started with tower gardening, mostly so I can talk about it so that I know what it's like. And because I've really struggled here in Florida anyway, even though I have land and I have square foot gardens, and I'm actually a pretty experienced gardener, I still want to do a tower garden anyway, just especially because I've been so inspired the last week seeing a lot of tower gardens and just how much food they get out of those things. But let me ask you something. If a tub of spinach from Costco cost $25, and everything else was priced in that range. Like you have the same income you do, but now a tub of spinach is $25. How much more interested would you be in growing your own food? Would that make things different for you? So just something to think about as we get started. And then, so my story is that I grew up gardening. I had to every morning in the summer, before I was allowed to do anything fun, I had to pull 500 weeds and bring the box or the bag of weeds in and show my mom. So I grew up with it. Even though my dad was in the military, we had fruit trees. And just as our fruit trees were coming on and producing peaches or apples or whatever, then we would up and move again. So very much built into my DNA. I think I've told you that the Romney family, my grandparents owned a produce dealership. So growing things is definitely in my DNA. And then I went to college, and when I was 21-year-old married college student, this other guy who lived in the apartment complex, and I went to the elderly lady who lived next door, and we said, hey, can we tear up your backyard and plant a giant garden? And if we do, we'll give you any of the produce you want. Just you tell us what you want, and we'll give it to you. We'll share our labor with you. And so it was a great little arrangement, and we got a great harvest, and it was my first time gardening on my own, and I was only 21. And Jamon's going to talk to you when I introduce him here in a minute about the problems of finding some community garden and why we actually really need to be able to control the property ourselves. I think he's going to talk about that, but I believe it's now, I didn't fact check this, but I think it's illegal to catch rainwater in some states. I think Utah and California, and I think Utah stands on some premise of water shortages, which the government in Utah is doing very strange things and just releasing water into the Great Salt Lake. A lot of the reservoirs in Arizona and California and Utah are dry. That used to have 5 million, I don't know, 5 million gallons of water in them. They've really replaced water boards. The people who sit on the water board and govern water for a state or a municipality, a lot of strange things have happened there. And so water becomes very important. I think Jamon's going to talk to you a little bit about that. But so I wasn't really gardening after my kids were grown because there was nobody to cook for, and I was traveling a lot. And so I kind of let gardening go for the first time in my life for the years before I moved to Florida. But when, I tried to garden in Park City and realized why I'd never seen a garden in Park City when everything was flourishing and everything was coming on. And then the first frost hit, I was like, oh, that's why I never see a garden here. So I packed up my square foot garden and I put the blocks, the cinder blocks, and then the planks, and I brought it to Florida. So this is going to be my third or fourth growing season, and it's been very hit or miss. And so the last couple of weeks, I've probably watched about 50 YouTube videos. And those of you who follow me on my personal page, on Saturday, I posted something. This is how I got connected to Jamon, because his mom has followed me, I think, for a really long time. But after watching about 50 videos, I was very confused for a long time. Then I finally started to realize from watching these videos that the same thing has happened to gardening that has happened in human health, which is that we've started to think of microbes as the enemy. The whole germ theory of disease now is in gardening too. We want to nuke all the microbes as if they're all bad, even though we need them. Like the soil should be this living, thriving ecosystem that helps us grow nutritious plants. And a lot of the things that deliver water, a lot of things we might use in the garden, including like I just bought a worm garden, like PVC pipe is always involved. There's a whole ton of plastics. That's not my favorite thing about what I was learning. But there was, for instance, one guy's video, and this is a guy who has like millions of people following him. He teaches to boil water and then pour boiling water into the soil to kill all the microbes. Then he teaches to use a synthetic chemical nitrogen. He even says chemical synthetic nitrogen as to replenish the earth, which of course is being done at scale. It's being done by all these big corporate farms all over the world, and we're facing a potash shortage and we're facing a nitrogen shortage. And I don't necessarily know all these chemical additives that they add to the soil, but I do know that that really isn't creating a healthy biome for the plants to grow in. Like I've known that for a long time. But so I'm watching this guy boil water to kill everything in the soil. I'm watching people say, don't plant your plants in soil, get potting soil. So that made me wonder, well, what's potting soil if it's not soil? So I literally started searching on it and I found out that there's no soil in potting soil. Like there's everything but soil in it. So I'm getting more and more confused. And I started to kind of come up with a theory of what really happened here. Then the guy in his video, and he's not the only one, I saw a few videos doing this, literally put aspirin in water and said that you spray the plants with aspirin. And I can't remember if that keeps bugs away or what that does, but I was like, oh my gosh, they're literally medicating our food with drugs. They're using pharma to grow our produce, that the whole point of growing, isn't it, to produce healthy foods for ourselves? So anyways, I did a post on that on Saturday, and just hundreds and hundreds of people were commenting, and people were telling me to go watch a film, which I highly recommend. You watch the first 20 minutes and that'll do it. I mean, it's like lots of Bible scriptures, and it's this beautiful place. It's called Back to Eden. So maybe Caroline could put in the chat the Back to Eden documentary in YouTube. It's, I don't know, it's like an hour and 20 minutes, but it's this guy in Washington State, and he does not water at all. He doesn't water, and his soil is perfect all year long. And he like grabs a handful of it out of the ground in August, and he says, I've never watered this. Look at this. He doesn't have weeds. He doesn't have pests. I mean, I'm sure he has a few, right? But he's not out there weeding all day, every day. He has this huge just crops, and the whole thing is just like beautiful footage of pulling giant beets the size of a softball out of the ground, and these apple trees that grow so that the branches are down on the ground, and you can just walk up and grab big beautiful apples off of them. Just some of the most spectacular looking produce you've ever seen, and it's just a beautiful space, and he's providing everything for his family that he needs, and probably for a lot of other people too. I don't know if he sells at a farmer's market or what exactly he does, but he he gives lots and lots and lots of Bible scriptures, and it's very inspiring. And the cinematography is beautiful, and it really makes you get excited about growing. So I've really needed to up my game because I'm in this different climate, and I was so excited about it because it's the sunshine state, right? And I can grow for 10 months a year. So I've been, doing 2 growing seasons a year, but in watching all these videos, I'm trying to figure out why can I grow carrots, and they even overwintered through a 5-day freeze, and then they're still doing great out there, but I cannot grow a beet to save my life. And somebody in that thread, you guys should all go read through that thread because there's so many great resources there. And Jamon was piping up, and his mom was piping up, and his mom was talking about all these clinics that he's doing all over the country. And she told me I should drive to South Carolina. I was like, well, that's 5 hours away. So maybe we'll get Jamon here to St. Johns County here in Florida sometime in the fall. He's got a pretty booked up schedule, and you guys could take a look at where he's teaching classes, because with gardening, it's so great to see it hands-on where he's actually showing you exactly how to do it. But the big thing that this guy did in Back to Eden, which is really simple, and keep in mind, I just learned this on Saturday or Sunday in this movie Back to Eden, is that he gets bark chips. And you can call like a tree trimming company, because they have to cut down all these trees or limbs, and then they have to get rid of it somewhere. And so I actually know a tree trimming guy because he did some tree trimming here. And I texted him 2 days ago, and I said, hey, do you have any bark chips? Because they just run it through a chipper. And he said, yeah, my truck is in the shop, but I do have a truck full of of bark chips, and I'll dump them on you. So what it does is that you let your seedlings come up, and then once they're above the ground, you use these little bark chips, and it not only controls pests and weeds, so you're gonna have a lot fewer weeds. It also helps you retain water, so you're not having to water all the time, which is really nice for us because we're not at this house all the time. We leave for 4 days almost every week. And it also decomposes over time, and it becomes your fertilizer. So it's basically what nature does, right? Like I look at the lots next to me that are like a couple acres, nobody's over there doing anything, and yet there's these big beautiful trees and all kinds of shrubs and greenery on the ground, and the branches fall to the ground, the leaves fall to the ground, and they become the soil, right? And we forget that that's how nature works. And nobody's over there watering. There's no drip watering over there. And so just taking some clues from nature, you chip all that bark, and it becomes your decomposed soil the next year. So this guy 2 days ago, I texted him. I was like, hey, do you have any bark chips? He's like, actually I do, but my truck is in the shop. I'll get it out tomorrow. So yesterday he got his truck out, and he texted me. He's like, well, maybe you don't want these bark chips because they're rotten. And I was like, rotten? I'm trying to think what rotten looks like, and I'm thinking, I think what he means is decomposed, right? So he thinks like a tree trimmer. He probably doesn't grow anything. I've never seen a single garden here. Never seen anybody gardening. Now, granted, I don't go into anybody's backyard, but like a lot of people have an acre or 2 acres in their front yard, and I don't see a garden. So probably there's some gardens here somewhere, but I don't know anybody who's growing successfully. And I think it's just because I'm spoiled and used to living in Utah where everybody gardens. Because there's a very much a preparedness culture there. So there's nobody to really learn from around here. Everybody tells me they have a gray thumb or a black thumb or whatever. So I'm kind of on my own. But these bark chips, so I just ran it past Jamon. I texted him and I was like, so this tree trimmer guy tells me his chips are rotten. And Jamon said to me, perfect. Like that means they're half decomposed. And I'm like, okay. So I told him to come dump on my property. It showed up today, and it is basically what was on the bottom in his truck that sat all winter in the truck. The stuff that's on the bottom is literally half decomposed already. Like it looks as much like rich soil as it does bark chips. So I'm pretty excited about it. I'll probably post on Facebook about it, but it's I did a little Facebook Live on the Green Smoothie Girl page, and you can see it there. I didn't like pick up handfuls of it or anything. But anyway, this is something that you guys could do. And maybe you don't have a big lot where you could have somebody dump a big ugly pile of bark chips. But basically that's going to be a lot of our strategy, because if you're always having to use inputs in your garden, then you have a much less sustainable method. And by putting the bark on the top of the ground, you're accomplishing several different purposes at once. One being the fact that it's going to decompose and be a really, really good soil for you. So anyway, this year I have grown greens here successfully, which that's probably the thing I've been most successful at. But I also have like 8 or 10 edible weeds in my yard. So I could have just eaten the wild edibles, and we do eat the wild edibles. They go into our green smoothie, but I want to eat more than just green smoothies. So this year we're really working on some calories, right? So we're doing buckets with potatoes. We've started a few. I don't know if it's going to work to plant this time of year. Most people are planting more like in the early fall. We're gonna do potatoes, and we're gonna do sweet potatoes. It's impossible around here to find the little chits, right? So you take your potato in the fall and you keep it until the spring, and then it grows those little things. You guys have all seen this because you've all had potatoes that you kept around in your pantry for a few months and it grew the things. Like sometimes the things will grow really long. That's great. That's a potato you can grow. So we have some from several months ago that grew the little chits. We've planted them. We're going to order some more because we don't have enough. And another thing I'm going to grow that does really well here, apparently in Florida, is ginger, because we juice the heck out of ginger. It's really expensive in the store, so it makes me feel good to be able to grow it in the bucket gardening method. So we're kind of going for calories, and we also just want a lot of ginger because we use a lot of it. So what Jamon's going to talk to you about tonight, I don't just love what he's doing because he understands this permaculture idea, which I just described to you with the bark chips. And probably there's more to it, and he'll tell you that. But I also love that he has a vision of there being a gardener in every community who helps spread it to their neighbors. And I totally believe that that could happen because my neighbors behind me, who I really don't know well, they have chickens and they have pigs, and the pigs have had babies and the baby pigs have had babies. So there's 3 generations of pigs. So they've got a whole lot of food on their property, which is probably even bigger than ours. But they haven't done a garden yet. And I think it's just because like they have less experience with that. So I think I could kind of be showing them what I do, helping them a little bit, maybe even give them some of my bark chips or whatever. But the point is, we really don't want to be the only one in the neighborhood growing food for the obvious reasons. And if we can get that to spread, Jamon kind of has a plan for that. So with that, I've really been impressed with him and his vision, and he's growing this. He's doing something that it's not that easy to earn a living by teaching people how to do this permaculture or sustainable agriculture and taking responsibility for your own family and whatever kind of piece of land you have, having it produce food for you. But it is time that we go back to that. He has a vision that includes a barter economy, and I think all this is really useful right now. So with that, thanks so much for being with us, Jamon. Take it away.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for having me on here. And I like what you said about you said you grew up with this, and your mom made you prove that you did this by showing her the weeds in the box. Getting the kids involved is a really big deal, and for what we're talking about today, I'm going to explain a little bit further. But it's pretty important that the whole family take a part in this, and to really come to the point where gardening is more than just gardening, right? We live in a world today where we have so many reasons to do anything at any moment. And so it can become really distracting not to take that sovereignty back into our own homes. And so that's really why I do what I do. And I'm going to screen share here to show you a little bit about permaculture. And we're going to go into some of the slideshow material that I have. But before we do, I'm going to show you this video that is going to kind of get all of us on the same page. And it's going to kind of set the stage for what I'm going to be talking about today. And as I do this, I want you to be open-minded. When I start presentations with groups of any kind, typically what I'll ask you to do is set what you understand in the realm of gardening or how to do something in any area of self-sufficiency aside for this for this meeting, and really deep dive into an open mind and open yourself up to a potential new perspective, because I'm going to talk about some things today that you may not have ever thought of. And I'm doing that very intentionally because you can Google anything you want at any moment and learn how to grow anything anywhere. And really, at the palm of your hand is this worldwide web of knowledge and information. At any second, you could pull information up. And so it's not really that valuable for you to be here and for me to just spoon feed you what you can Google at any second of the day. So rather, my attempt in doing this and what we've been doing around the whole United States is to cause a paradigm shift, to introduce the concepts and fill the gaps and correct some of the false pretenses that have been causing problems for people to take back food sovereignty and to have gardening as a central and integral part of their community so that we can really realistically lean back into a realm where we have freedom and we can live in that way sustainably. So let's deep dive into this for a second. And if you're okay with just checking your beliefs at the door, and then you can pick up what you want on your way back home. But as you enter into this space, come with an open mind, and I promise you will not regret it.
Hello, hello, my name is Jamon, Mysliwiec, and I just wanted to give you a quick introduction of who I am. And what we're doing. And I founded a program called the Independent American Gardener. Which is based around the project of bringing self-sufficiency back to the home base and then expanding it into the communities.
That could either stay too wet or soggy and rotten.
Plants, oregano, thyme, things like that will help.
Every home down a street, right? So that families can return to a level of self-sufficiency that really resonates at home. I was born and raised on a little 3-acre homestead. We had cows, chickens, ducks, horses, pigs, even raccoons, and really just got my hands dirty in nature from a very young age. And I originally was a kind of a nature addict. I grew up being drawn to anything and everything that was alive. I went from being homeschooled up until I was about 9 years old. I went to a private school until I was about 12, where I was introduced into public school until I was about 15, 16, and tested out with a GED to attend Dixie State University. And I studied biology throughout that course and throughout that time frame of my life. And I got really involved with my passion for camping and outdoors and emergency preparedness, survival skills. My father was Navy, and so he taught me pretty young how to walk out into the mountains and survive with nothing but a pocket knife, right? And so that kind of mentality stuck with me for a long time. That got me into emergency preparedness. Following that, I really started to have more of a abundance mindset, and getting out of scarcity brought me into the abundance and reality that we have accessible to us here on the earth through this beautiful planet, this big blue rock that the Lord has given us. And I am a Christian by all means of the word. I believe in Christ, and I follow the doctrine of Christ as much as I possibly can in my work and in my personal ethic. This regenerative idea of something growing and regrowing and sustaining itself long term is what enables real food security. And I have toured and mentored on a personal development level and in an agricultural regenerative level. True freedom comes from maintaining your basic most necessities in life: food, water, shelter. Everywhere from New York to Tennessee to Missouri to southern Utah and California. I've seen bits and pieces of the country in different ways, and I've been constantly growing my education on climate and gardening methods in all of these different hostile environments and really easy environments. I believe that we're here on the earth to live a full life, and we do that by having access to those things that we need to thrive, and having those things underneath our belt so that we can leverage our full potential. and shine out into the world with what we're truly passionate about. I don't believe that we should be wasting too much time. And so my experience in gardening and agriculture was stemmed from personal habit and personal preference as just a young child, but grew into something professionally that I really am passionate about and has powerfully impacted my life, and I hope to impact my children with as well. Go ahead, buddy. Everything from small homesteads and backyards in urban settings to rural agricultural farms, prioritizing diversity through agroforestry and permaculture design. Permaculture is where I find my niche. That's where all of the diverse level of skills and different aspects of life that I've experienced growing up come together into a design function. And permaculture is a design science where I'm able to pull from my wardrobe of skills and choose and select what fits best for this particular home and helps meet the goals of this particular family. I really just want to be a part of homesteading and everywhere that I go. I feel like food, water, and shelter should be in the backyard, never should have left the backyard, and I want to bring it back to more backyards. So that's who I am, and I'm looking forward to meeting you.
Awesome, awesome. So in listening to that and kind of getting a bearing for what it is that I do and where we're coming from, I hope that gives you kind of a blank slate to start from and how we're going to move forward in the rest of this discussion. And before we get too far here, I want to just welcome everybody that's here today and ask you, if you are present, if you don't mind turning on your video. It helps me out to know that I'm talking to somebody and not just the wall as we're kind of presenting here. If it's distracting for you watching the videos instead of the presentation, you can swap in Zoom over to just seeing the presenter view. But if you would be so kind as to turn on the video, let me know you're here. That helps me out quite a bit. Now, as we move forward here, I'm not gonna tell you too much about who I am, because I kind of just did right in that video. But just some basic bullet points that I want everybody to understand is that what we're doing here, like Robyn said, is very mission-based. And so as I tell you about gardening and how to do this on a level that's perennial and functional long-term, it's all aimed at self-sufficiency for the families. Everything that we're doing is about self-sufficiency. And as I said in the video, I have a background in a lot of diverse different topics and a lot of different things that I did in my life. And so when I came together to bring all of this into one central place, permaculture did that for me. I didn't find permaculture till I was about 16 years old. And I didn't even certify and begin exploring that until I was about maybe 18, wholeheartedly. It was just kind of dabbling. But when I did, that kind of opened up my wardrobe, so to speak, where I was able to pull from my history to apply for that specific step that is next in the equation for that family design, that personal property project. And the Independent American Gardener program is where all of this comes together. This is where really we need to see the communities in the world go in order to really bring freedom and liberty and the ability to own our own surplus and manage our own resources in the world that is just getting more and more crazy every single day, in a functional way, and bring it together in a way that society can sustain. So as we go forward here, just a couple topics that I'm going to touch on, and then we're going to get really deep and talk about it if you're not actually physically doing it. And so I'm going to give you specific steps today. I have some free resources for you, and then we're actually going to get into a little bit of the nitty gritty on some false philosophies that people have, and try to cause that paradigm shift for you today, so that you can try something new and get bigger and better results. Einstein said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to have different results. That's just not how it works. And so I'm going to hopefully introduce you enough to this concept that it can inspire you to move forward with family self-sufficiency and really attain to yourself as a foundation and a cornerstone, but it requires that regenerative paradigm. So as we get forward here, food security really is the focus. It's the cornerstone in everything that we're doing because, families need to eat, right? And so this is why I got so far into gardening, because it's not only is it a joy for me, but it's really a pivotal point in society. You have to own the food supply in order to maintain freedoms and liberties. And there's an old slogan I heard a long time ago, a food forest in every yard. And I took that to heart because if you look down your street and you could see, if you imagine yourself standing in front of your house in the middle of the road and looking down the street, if you could see food leaning out of the homes at every single home down the street, you could go on your afternoon walk for lunch and come back with a full stomach. Entire communities could feed themselves. And this isn't some utopian paradise dream. This is happening around the entire world. There are organizations that are taking this upon themselves, like us, to make this a reality. And some organizations are starting up entire properties and structures or living communes, things like that, to make this a reality. There's actually some in Florida, Robyn, but these things are happening in a way that is kind of under the radar because people have never heard of the word permaculture. And so permaculture to some people, it just goes right over their head. And so what we've taken is the approach, and since given my history and mentorship, is to teach the concepts. And I actually want to get into the living room of our clients. We actually host live events in the living rooms. Our ability to do this depends on the families actually understanding it and our ability to reach our goal of living in this sustainable way and into this new regenerative paradigm. So I get into the living rooms and I actually physically do this with you, and we have a lot of fun. But our approach to family self-sufficiency is kind of broken down into 4 ways. Number 1 is we want to return food production to the homes of the families that actually eat it. That's a big one. You shouldn't be getting your food from somebody else. You should be responsible for, as we are, and have direct connection and ownership of our food supply. And the way that we like to do that is by growing in abundance. And permaculture provides the foundation and the set of principles and ethics to help us do that in a sustainable way that goes beyond sustainability. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the future. But growing in abundance it can't be understated. We need to get away from monocultures and into polycultures. Now, enhancing system resilience, one of the fundamental areas of permaculture is that every system, or I should say, every element performs multiple functions, and every function is performed by multiple elements. So if your garden is only performing one function in one area, then all of the elements that it needs to survive, whether it's water, sun, soil health, whatever other ecology might be up against it, pest prevention, disease prevention, all these other things are not being provided by that system. Who has to provide them? You do. And so now work is required in order for your food supply to exist. And in nature, as Robyn said in the Back to Eden video, he mentions just briefly how he can look at the forest and nobody's out there watering it, nobody's tilling it, nobody's fertilizing it. You're not standing there on the hillside with a garden hose keeping the forest alive. But year after year, natural disaster after natural disaster, it continues to thrive. And it does that because of design. There is a system in nature I'm going to teach you about today. Now, on our 4th leg here, we encourage local resourcefulness. It shouldn't cost you more to grow lettuce than it does to buy it. And that is a constant issue that people have in the world today, is that they don't want to garden because it's more expensive than just going and getting their food from the easy big box stores. And I'm going to show you today it's not more expensive to garden, to grow your own food supply. Now, before we get into all this, you need to understand what permaculture is by definition, because when I say that, some of you may have heard that before. It might be a new term to some people. So I'm going to give you this definition that I want you to run with. This is my favorite definition of permaculture that I've ever heard. It's not mine, but this is the summary of all things permaculture. Permaculture is not gardening. It's not water systems. It's not ethical land management. It's not sustainable construction. It's not a regenerative business model. It's not a closed loop property design. It's all of those things. Permaculture is a conscious design and maintenance of agriculturally productive ecosystems. It is a design science by which we view the world from. It's the lens that we choose to view our resources, our projects, our tasks, and our relationships with. And it's based in a set of principles that we choose permaculture as a design science in what we do, and approaching our gardens or properties in general, or our clients or our communities as a whole, is because we believe that every family should have a haven from the world. They should have a safe place to come away to. A haven is a port, safe harbor that ships can come into when the seas are getting rough, and come away from the storm, literally. And I want to see this for my family. I want to see this for my friends and my family's families. I want to see this in the world everywhere you look. You should have all your resources met, your food, water, shelter, and surplus needs within the bounds of your own home. At any given moment, we've been through the ringer time and time again. We know that if we don't have our infrastructure at home, a fragile system in the world today exists that can cripple our ability to access it in external resources. So this is a permaculture design, and I'm not going to get into that, but I just want to show you, this is one area of permaculture that you can get into, is ethical, logical, practical design of your permaculture properties. It goes far beyond your garden. Now, today, we're going to talk about how to grow food instead of lawns. That's a pretty common topic. And a little bit about how to do that in a sustainable way. Robyn mentioned the Back to Eden method, and I'm going to highlight that specifically because we actually use the Back to Eden method as the foundation for our food forests. We mimic nature, and very specifically the point in nature where two ecosystems collide, whether it's the forest and the field, meet at the forest edge. The forest edge is where an abundance of life exists in nature. And so what we do through permaculture is we harness that abundance and we duplicate that system, and all the ecology that's happening right there works for us. And it does it freely and willingly, almost like it wants to. And so when we create these kinds of systems, our gardens can grow themselves. It doesn't cost you more to grow lettuce than it does to buy it. And this kind of abundance is very, very real. Now, I don't want to get into all the issues. We all know issues abound in the world. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them so that we can kind of get on a level plane here. And the recording for this, I have a lot of content I'm going to share with you today, so I'm going to do my best to fly through these slides. So I understand this is going to be recorded, and you'll be able to watch that later and pause at any moment to go over. It's pretty common that we all understand that our food is basically killing us. Mainstream agriculture has done its due diligence in everything from chemical toxicity to just making the cost to value so unethical. And we know that what used to be 1 cup of or 1 bowl of a vegetable, now you have to have 10 bowls to equal the same nutritional value. And so we know this depletion is happening on a large scale. We also know that the impact zones of modern methods are expanding. We see that in the Midwest, where I live, this expansion of modern agriculture is still, to this day, no matter what we do to try to talk about it on a big level, on a political level or anything else, is knocking down more forests, turning more valuable and fertile land into flat monoculture fields. And what happens when a monoculture is put up is that plants release pheromones. And those pheromones come out like a big yellow plume all over this big monoculture. And every pest in the area smells that attractant and comes in to balance the ecosystem. Their job in nature is not to eat your vegetables. It's to balance the ecosystem. And so when you plant in a monoculture in your garden, with a mono, for those that don't know, mono means one. So monoculture is just one, right? Like a cornfield. And did you hear me mention how the plume happens, how plants release pheromone? That's really the important part. When plants release their pheromones, usually they're doing that to signal other plants. Trees will actually talk to each other. For example, in a forest, if a pest lands on one tree, that tree and starts to get attacked by a certain type of pest, it will actually release a scent that surrounding trees will literally smell. And then they're able to then respond by releasing a repellent. And so then the forest is able to protect itself in this way. It's a defense built into the ecology. And there's more that behind the scenes here, but we can harness that capability in our gardens by planting in polycultures. because one plant will support the other, and we can draw back these nutritionally depleted habits that modern agriculture has, and this degradation of our seed, our soils, and our economy by planting in our own properties and doing it in a simple way. Now, Bill Mollison said, though the problems of the world grow ever more complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. And for those of you who don't know, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren are known as the fathers of permaculture. They are the founders of the concept. And the key elements of a permaculture design is very specifically a forest. And so that's what I'm going to teach you how to build today. I'm just going to give you a quick kind of review on how to do that for yourself and get started. Now, some of the solutions that we have found to all the problems that I don't even need to get into, I'm sure Robyn gets into some of those with you, is this step in design. Now, health and wellness comes from our food and water, literally all we eat. Wellness can get into energy fields, it can get into so many other things, but if you don't have that space, that haven, and that healthy food and that healthy surplus and that cleaner building, when you consume something, whether it's a space or a substance, is more of the same. And so when we look at havens, we look to close the loop. Our solution is to bring all the resources into a space where your chicken eats. Let's say, for example, you're sitting in your kitchen and all of your scraps are going in the trash. Well, we can divert that. We can put all those into the chicken coop in a big mound, let's say. And let's say you got a big mound of organic matter right in the middle of your chicken coop. What's going to happen is the chickens are going to start scratching that up, and chicken manure is high in nitrogen. And so now you're going to be able to scrape all that out at the end of the week and put that right back into the garden. And then it's going to help grow your garden, and that's going to go right back into your kitchen. And so now we've closed the loop. There's a few more steps you could throw in there, but that's just one example of what a closed loop is. Now, if we can do that with every element on your property, and we can let nature do all the hard stuff for us, then we have a successful design, and we have a self-sustaining ecosystem, just like our natural forests that surround much of the world. Now, I'm not gonna, this is one of the resources that I have for you, this page displayed here on this slide, so you don't have to read that, but I want you to understand that there is a set of ethics and principles. And as we get into the process of building your garden, I'm not going to highlight these and go through these for you. Instead, I've taken another step here, and I have some specific valuable field guides and digital downloads that are free for you today. And I'll show you how to get those, but they will highlight these elements. When you're building your garden, when you're thinking of your garden this year, and you're thinking, I'm going to get outside and I'm going to put my raised beds here, I'm going to put my dug-in garden here, my no-till garden here, my chicken coop over here, I'm going to ask you to stop and step back and just stand on your property for a minute and look at your paper, your digital download on your phone or print it off, and go through this principle list and ask yourself if your design can meet all 12 of these principles. If it can't, then start to consider outside of the box ways that you can do that. And there's other continued education options we have to help you with that if you choose. But this will get you started, right? And then a food forest, I've mentioned a couple different times. As a surface level understanding of what a food forest is it's literally mimicking the natural forest. The 7-layer system is found all over the world in the natural forest. And I like to think that there's 9. There's 2 more, the mycelium layer, and then also the aquaculture layer. But we're not going to get into those today for the concepts that we need only 7. So as we get further along, I'll highlight what you're going to do with all 7 layers. But to get started here, you need to understand that you're diversifying yield. And this isn't a new concept. It's not my concept. This is something that happens all over the world. And we do this in every scale, whether it's a large scale agroforestry property of 500 to 1,000 acres that we can do with regenerative agriculture models, no-till methods at scale, or if it's something right in your backyard around a fruit tree, and we call it a guild. So there's a wide range of capabilities with permaculture. And permaculture can dive into the urban level where it's right in the heart of the city and you could be growing your food supply. Or it can be in the community level where we're designing entire infrastructure for new development or existing development. Or it can be in the rural area where we're getting into farmsteads and homes and off the grid capabilities. And I really don't like to get much bigger than farmsteads. I think that we don't need to go bigger than that. And so when I see big operations in agriculture, I actually withdraw. Now Jeff Lawton, another big name in permaculture, says that all the world's problems can be solved in a garden. And I believe that's true. I've seen some of these solutions manifest for me in my personal life. And the way that we're doing this very specifically is teaching new generations by example. And we know that if we don't make a difference right now, and in a way that our new generations can see it, then our families are going to duplicate the mistakes we've made. And so we demonstrate, we don't talk, we do it. And when we do that, and everything we do impacts the family, and we're able to then work with our youth in a big way by example. This is my beautiful family here, my 5 boys and my beautiful wife. And as I said, everything I do is for family. I have a little bit of a bias, and I'm going to come clean with that right now. The reason that I do this and the reason that I travel the country trying to help make a difference is because I want my kids to grow up in that kind of world. And so when I'm teaching you how to do this, if you don't succeed, my kids grow up in a world that is not what I'm trying to create for them. And so I'm incentivized to help you succeed, right? And so I'm just coming clean with that bias here right off the bat. And that picture there was taken in Lulu's garden, as well as these photos here, the sign that you see and some of the bee pictures and things. All the photos that you're going to see today are from our personal food forest project. It was a 0.87 acre agroforestry project. Now, you don't have to read all of these. These are handouts from our physical live event, but I thought it was important to display here. And I'm going to introduce a concept to you that I want to try to wrap your heads around. And ask yourself honestly, before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of the content here, which paradigm you fit in. There are 3 paradigms that you can put yourself in, or that you can put most of society in. I've yet to find a specific scenario where you can't fit them into this kind of a system or design. So a modern approach to the world today is the degenerative paradigm. The degenerative paradigm suggests that man is the worst living organism on the planet. Everything we do is destructive. And so we might as well just eat, drink, and be merry. And we might, this is where you see people throwing things out their window, and it doesn't really matter what they do with their time, because as long as they're joyful and they're just doing their thing, no matter the consequence that it may have for others or their surroundings, they're happy, they're living their life. And so this is a degenerative paradigm, because ultimately it has a negative impact in the end, and it's in a downward trajectory. Now, the world saw the downward trajectory and said, we're running out of resources. They got freaked out and they went into scarcity mode. And so now this huge push for the sustainable paradigm has taken over much of the world. This is where you see the green thumb stuff. And this is where you see people say green movement, green communities, green this, and then everybody getting into the sustainability. And this is where you see people turn their properties into xeriscapes. Utah is rampant with xeriscapes. A xeriscape is a property landscaping model that produces no surplus, but it also doesn't use any. And so they say it's sustainable. Now, the model landscaping, the grass lawn was actually a statement piece. When the American lawn was first created, it was a statement because most of the communities were growing their food. And so the rich and wealthy would turn a piece of their property into grass as a statement that says, I don't need that space to grow my food. I can waste this area because I'm wealthy and I'm on top. It was a statement of stature. And so now we see today, it's expensive to maintain. It takes fuel for the lawnmower. You got to buy the lawnmower itself. It takes hours of your life to be able to get out there and do that. And it has no yield. There's no surplus. And so there's the degenerative and the sustainable paradigm. I'm going to suggest that we get out of the sustainable paradigm and we go beyond sustainable. We get into the regenerative paradigm. Now, the sustainable paradigm says that, yeah, we might be the worst living organisms on the planet, but at best, we could be neutral. And it comes from an area of scarcity. The regenerative paradigm seeks to change that trajectory so that we can move up in the world. And it says, we might be the most beneficial organisms on the planet. And that's the subscription of thinking that I subscribe to. That's the level of thought that I choose to live in. Abundance thinking, abundance mindset. So when you're looking at your gardens and you're feeling like your own food supply is never going to manage, it's never going to manifest for you because you just don't have the capability, get yourself out of the negative way of thinking and just find the solution. Seek the answer. And I'm going to give you a bunch of those answers today. My aim is to help you become a permaculture people. We're traveling all over the world so that we can help create a permanent culture, one that lives and exists in the regenerative space, something that can impact America in a big, big way. We've been from Virginia to California and many, many states in between. We've been up to New York and to Michigan. We've been down through Missouri and Utah Valley. We've been across Nebraska. There's just so many areas that we're trying to impact. And we're making this movement public in a big, big way, in a very unique way. And we've dedicated a lot of our life to doing this. And all of this started because we physically got onto our property and did it. And when we did it from a perspective where we were trying to prove that you didn't have to do it with any money. Lulu's Garden was the name of our first project. And it was done in a way where the economy around us was very, very weak. A big company moved and crippled the local neighborhood because that company was providing for all of the surplus and all of the jobs, I should say. It was a big factory, Nestle. And when they left and they shut their doors, they laid off everybody. And because the utility company was banking on their stream of revenue, what happened when it left is the utility company could no longer meet its minimums. And so they put the expense in the community. So now the community was out of work and had higher bills. So what we did is we decided to tell everybody, hey, we have a solution for you, and nobody would believe us because it's in the middle of the Corn Belt, very conventional. And so we decided to demonstrate it instead of tell them because we just couldn't get any ground with education. And so we did it. And so now we have a philosophy, I'll tell you a little bit down the road here, of doing it first before we come out and tell you we know how to do it. As I go through the next set of slides here, you're going to see some of the areas where we very specifically took a photo of that section of the design plan in the first year phase. And then I'll talk a little bit about how that's all happening there so that you can learn and how to do this yourself. Now, what you're seeing right here is hugelkultur, and I'm not going to get into that yet. We'll get into it later, but these are two hugelkultur mounds with polyculture designs on the top. I don't water these. I don't till them. I don't fertilize them. I don't top them off. I don't do any kind of compost or any kind of management whatsoever. I don't do any pests. There's nothing that no pest prevention. There's nothing that I do to maintain those, and they produce us a yield. Now, hugelkultur is kind of a simple concept, but it can be done the wrong way. Now, we had another area on the property where we were doing hugelkultur on the inside of our garden beds. And that's the most common way that you'll see people use the hugelkultur model. But what they'll usually do in hugelkultur, I'll give you a really basic understanding right now, is so hugelkultur can be done in a garden bed, it can be done in a mound, it can be done in a variety of different ways. But hugelkultur is a word meaning mound culture. It's a German phrase that literally for creating a living culture like in a petri dish on the inside of a mound. And we want that beneficial bacteria and we want that beneficial mycelium to grow in the center of the soil mass so that you can literally grow your soil. When you get to the point in your gardens where your soil is growing itself and it's becoming self-fertile, what happens is now your plants become self-sustaining. Now, this picture is my wife out there in our Back to Eden style garden where we put the foundation in for the first season, and she's out there laying some cayenne peppers in a row. Now, I don't have the photo that followed that, but I want you to know that nothing should be done in singularity. So between these rows, when we would come back, we would then place in flowers like marigolds. We would mound up the soil around every start that we're putting into the ground so that they didn't contact the wood chips. And I saw some comments when we started about how wood chips rob nitrogen, and that's not true. I'm going to correct that right now. When a tree is growing, it grows with its own set of nitrogen. When that tree is chipped, it still contains that nitrogen. That nitrogen that it contains is very, very minuscule, but it is the exact amount that it needs to decompose if it is a living species, if it's still alive. And so when you put these chips all over the foundations of your garden, most people will run into a problem, not because it's robbing nitrogen, but because you just set an unbalance. You just unbalance the whole soil ecology by putting in a ton of carbon, a whole bunch of one thing. Now you have a wood chip garden, a monoculture of wood chips. And so the way to balance that is by adding in a nice compost layer before you start the foundations of your back Eden garden. Then you put in all your wood chips. And we do about 12 inches when we start these gardens. You never have to do 12 inches again, but for the starting season, we do 12 inches. And I'll explain the process for how to do that here in a little bit. And that sounds absurd. So 12 inches, it is absurd. And I'll tell you why. But a critical thing to understand is, if in the event that tree that was chipped was deficient in nitrogen, and now it wants nitrogen in order to break down, what will happen is it will only affect the top 2 inches of soil. Almost all of your root system established plants go below that 2-inch mark. And so the only time that you would run into an issue is if you're planting seed. So you can see here that she is not planting seed, she's planting starts that we grew indoors. So for the first season of a back to Eden garden, you want to start your plants indoors, and then you bring your plugs outside. And that's going to make a world of difference for you. And then throughout the property, what you'll notice is, especially if you're doing it right, the ecology around you will start to play in your garden. So we had this big oak that was housing tons and tons of squirrels. And the squirrels, because we were aiming to demonstrate a permaculture design, we wanted a surplus. But what was happening was the squirrels were planting acorns in the wood chips, and so we were growing these oak trees all over the whole property, right? And so what we decided to do was let the squirrels work for us and value that natural workforce. Because of how rich the soil becomes under wood chips, we were able to then just pull out very easily, my 2-year-old could do it, these nice, long, deep, tap-rooted trees and repot them and then sell these trees, these saplings. And so we had a free labor performing this starting process for us to sell oak trees. It was a really cool little process to watch because these squirrels did all of that work for us and it was free to us. Now, the polyculture and guild method is kind of a crazy word. And if you're fresh to gardening, you're not really going to understand some of the terms that I'm using. And so I want to just give you the basic understanding is that a guild is when multiple plants support one another. In nature, every single species is there doing something for something else. Nothing is there by accident. A dandelion will grow, for example, in a space where the soil is compact. If you've ever tilled your garden or seen your neighbor's garden, freshly after that it's been tilled and it's just laying fallow, you'll notice dandelion will pop up all over it because it'll actually be like a sunken down square usually, and you'll just get littered with dandelion, crabgrass. And what's happened? Dandelion's coming in, and it's specifically trying to sit in a taproot down to fluff that soil. And dandelions will actually accumulate potassium, and then they'll put that into their leaves, and then they'll deposit it out at the top of the end of the year when those leaves are dropped. And what happens when the dandelion does its job is then it decomposes, and it leaves behind it the holes and the aeration in the soil. So this back to Eden garden, one of the ideas that we had with this was to produce a surplus, right? And so what we did was we went around and we got all of these pallets and these free wood resources from all over town to demonstrate on different types of gardening, different models of doing this. And Robyn mentioned a wood chip, an arborist that could come by and drop chips. And just to expand on that a little bit, they actually have to pay to bring that to the local landfills. And so when you call the arborist and you say, hey, can you reroute that to my property? Oftentimes they'll do it for free. Because it's very expensive for them to travel to the extra distance in the first place. And then second to that, they're also going to have to pay in order to drop it. And they can get you right next to where they're chopping the tree and then drop it for free right there. And you can see the results of, as I flip through here, all of our produce and things. And this process, I encourage you, if you don't already have it, and in the notebook you're using for tonight, maybe begin a garden journal. Do it and then record it all season long so that next season you can duplicate it, because you're going to come across some things that you need to tweak. And the concepts that I'm teaching you, I want you to know that these are duplicatable in every climate that we have been in America, from coast to coast. And some of these are really, really cold climates, and some of this is more tropical. But the same pattern is duplicated in every single system, and it works because this is how the surface of the earth works. This is how natural ecosystems develop. And there's some other mixed in jargon to understanding really the backstory to all of that, but it's a very simple process when you follow nature in your local environment. And when you're designing your property for yourself, you're going to look at it and you're going to say, oh man, this is a good spot. And then you're going to stand there and you're going to realize the sun's hitting that area wrong. So then you're going to readjust, or you're going to start spreading out the wood chips. And then you're going to realize you forgot to trim the grass down. And so the grass is coming up through the wood chips. And so there's a few steps that I'm going to suggest that you take.
So while you're talking, John was telling me that when the wood chip guy came, or the tree trimmer guy really came and dumped it, he was really happy because he said exactly what you did, that he would have had to pay to go dump it on somebody else. So he was glad to dump it on us. But like, I just want to point out that I just literally learned about this on Sunday from someone posting on my Facebook feed. And I've had lots of people put me in gardening communities on Facebook. So I'm in a bunch of them, including a new one that's like Florida gardeners. But definitely, so social media will be your best friend. Social media is not my best friend. Social media frustrates me greatly. But when you want to know something, Facebook is so helpful in their communities. Good gardener communities are the best. Like that post that I did on Saturday, everybody should go look at it. So what was that? The 26th of February. Everybody should go read the comments in there, because most of the people commenting in there, they know stuff. There was probably like 3 people asking me if I know what this hugelkultur is that you were talking about, that the base of it is a tree trunk. And I still didn't know what it was until you talked about it. But I just wanted to say that, it was very easy for me to get a big truckload of, bonus half decomposed wood chips. But we do have somebody asking if pine chips, pine needles, different kinds of wood, are there any that don't work? She wants to know if hardwood versus pine wood.
Yes and no. So it depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? Soft woods will decompose faster. Hardwoods obviously will not. So if you're dealing with a soil that's really rich and fertile already, then you can be a little bit more selective in what kind of wood you want to get. But if you're just starting this process, ignore what kind of wood it is, because what happens when the chips are down and their decomposition process begins is 90% of any chemicals they may have or need, or any processes that they might be going through in their decomposing phase to rob nitrogen or anything else, is going to be balanced in that decomposing phase. Especially some people will tell me, oh, well, what if the tree that was chipped was diseased and that's why the arborist is out there chipping it? When that happens and they dump that big mound on your property, what I like to do is let it steep. I'll do it for about 3 days to a week, and I'll let that pile sit there and heat up and do its job. And I'll bring outside my hose and I'll drench the whole thing in water, and then I'll shove the hose down the top and I'll let it sit there for about 5-10 minutes. And then I'll come back, turn the water off, and then I let that mound sit for about 3 days to a week. And in that process, it's neutralizing any chemicals, it's destroying any insects, larvae, things like that. And as it gets hot, you'll actually, in the mornings, you'll see it steaming off the top. Some people will tell you that it can get so hot it can catch fire, and not to put it close to a building. And so maybe I'll echo that. I have never, ever seen that happen, but you'll hear that warning from people a lot. And I have seen thousands of wood chip piles, and I've never seen one catch fire. So from my testimony, that's not realistic, but be cautious of how hot it can get. And then just to further answer the question, anything that you think might suck nitrogen is only going to do it, even if it does, to the first 2 inches of soil. So pine is not an exception. It is only going to get down to about the first 2 inches of soil. And almost all of your root crop, your even leafy greens, which have really shallow roots, go below 2 inches. So you should be totally fine. But hopefully that answers your question. Now I'm going to I got quite a few slides here. I'm just going to skip through a bunch of this, but I don't have an affinity for much for Steve Jobs, but I do have to make a point here. He had a great quote. Despite what kind of character he is, he said, "Those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And so when you're sitting in your community and you're wondering how you're going to create community and how you're going to get this to work, I want to inspire you for just a second here to just get outside and do it. We sold our permaculture property, our personal family faith haven, and travel the country now so that we can do this, and so that we can help families understand how to turn communities into sustainable communities. Now, really fast, one of the critical elements in all of this is water. If you're not managing water flow, especially those of you that are on the west of the states, you're skipping the most critical step that you could possibly take in all of your design process for your gardens. If you're depending on municipalities or a infrastructure for your water supply, your hose, then your food is owned by those who own the water, because your food won't grow without that water. And so the very first thing that we do is we develop earthworks to move groundwater to our gardens. We catch it with rain in the gutters from our homes, or we develop what's called a swale. And you can go to our YouTube channel and see this graphic on one of the videos there to understand what a swale is. Now, when you're developing your property, especially if it's an acreage, you can do this for urban properties as well, but typically the slopes aren't great enough to even worry about it. You're going to want to pull up a topographic map of your property to understand the flow of water. Once you've identified where the water flows across the property, and you've been able to pinpoint how that happens, what kind of chemicals it's bringing in from neighboring lots, and where it's ponding and puddling, you can begin to develop these areas of growth where you put water-loving species or desert-loving species, dry soils and things like that, and different microclimates in your soil, because you shouldn't have to water anything. So this was one of the preliminary designs we did for a 12.5 acre property. Now, this download I have for you right here, I'm not gonna get into, because I have that for you. I'm gonna let you self-study that, and then I'm gonna actually connect you guys with a means of connecting with me personally and our group in order to continue a discussion on this, because I just have so much I want to run through with you today. Now, one of the key elements in garden, and especially those of in the West, that bothers the heck out of me, is that you'll drive down the street that nobody's got their garden soils covered. There's no mulch at all. That is the one thing in the forest that makes the forest work. And what happens, especially in drought-stricken areas, is that 80% of the water sprayed on bare soils is evaporated off. Now imagine our agriculture at large across the Midwest, our Corn Belt, how much water is just being evaporated off. But if you put 2 inches of mulch, whether that's straw, leaves, or wood chips or whatever, just 2 inches flips the equation, and 80% of the water is now retained. Now, when we do our gardens, we do it very specifically so that 100% of the water that lands in our gardens stays in our gardens. And we get big yields. And this is a picture from our garden in Missouri, where the soil underneath the wood chips was once a red and brownish clay, and it's now a rich black fertile soil beneath 12 inches of wood chips. Now, a living mulch is your goal. So when you start a back Eden garden, or you start any kind of food forest project, and you put down a whole bunch of wood chips, and you've got all that carbon, now you did unbalance the ecology. And so right off the bat, you want to put in a whole bunch of ground cover crops like strawberries. Let the weeds come up, because they're there to perform a function, like I mentioned with dandelion. And we can get in a little bit later into dynamic accumulators, which is going to make a big difference for you as well. That's kind of a big word I'll have to explain. But for those of you that don't know what it is, maybe some of you are pretty familiar with all of these concepts. But the living mulch concept is that your organic matter you're putting on your garden first should be a one-time deal. You shouldn't have to do that again the following couple of seasons. Once that's established, you should be able to then grow a green living mulch, a ground cover, over all of your property. This is a small guild, the companion planting system that we built around a walnut tree. And just look at that, and just consider how many edible species do you think we were able to fit into that spot? That's really overgrown. The ground ivy we let take over because it's medicinal for the lungs. And so we use that as a nice ground cover out there. But in that, I think I counted this up before, and there's roughly 27, 25, something like that, edible things planted in that space. Whether that's melons, ambrosia melons, oregano, strawberries, watermelons. We have sunflowers on the sun-facing side of this, and then it's centered around a walnut tree. So there's so many things that you can grow in a companion system. The spacing requirements that people tell you is essential for a garden to grow is oftentimes incorrect, because most things in nature will grow right on top of each other. The difference is that they're different species. And so when you're planting something in one particular area and you're putting, let's say, 2 garlic cloves side by side, and you get them too close together, then yeah, they're going to have a trouble spreading their root crop. But if you've got a garlic growing right here, and then you've got, let's say, it's coming out of your ambrosia melon crop, well, now you have all your melons growing and your big weeds growing on top of that garlic, nice moist soil beneath all of that shaded canopy that the melons are providing, and it's giving that nice porous and soft soil that your garlic needs. So there's a companion planting system that you can do there. Now, this is some of our hugel beds I pictured earlier, and we did the same thing on all of our hugel culture beds. We companion plant. If you're not companion planting, then you're missing out on a whole level of resources. And it's not just, and companion planting should be kind of rephrased in general, because you're not looking to companion a particular plant. You're looking to build a system. That system is a food forest. So I want to give all of you the download now. So here's your instructions, because there's a lot that I have for you to read, because you got to read it. I just can't explain it all in an hour and a half. So you're going to go to this link, the www.linktr.ee/TIAG events. That's going to take you to a link tree. And when you get to that link tree, there's going to be a couple items you're going to see right off the bat. The first one at the very, very top, you can pretty much ignore for the time being. But if you scroll down to member resources or attendee resources, there's going to be a section where it says step 1, 2, and 3. If you click on step 2, it's going to ask you to put in the code 2000. When you put in code 2000, it's going to open up a cloud file for you. And I don't just have one resource in there. I have multiple resources in there for you. I have a food forest layering system for you. I have companion planting sheets for you. And I have a list of 500 plus dynamic accumulators in a database on an Excel sheet specifically for you. Now, the reason that I don't want to dive too far into all of this in its complexity here is very specifically because it's a lot to talk about in such a short period of time. So you're going to want to download all of those to use them offline, and then dive into what that content is in some free time after the event tonight. The dynamic accumulator database is a really important part. So just briefly, I'll explain what that is. A dynamic accumulator is a species of plant in the forest that sends down a big taproot. Like trees, for example, some trees are like locust. It fixes nitrogen. What it does is it sends down its roots and it accumulates a particular nutrient. When it accumulates that particular nutrient, it brings it up through the barks, through the limbs, into the leaves, and then it deposits it at the topsoils at the end of every season. Comfrey is well known in the permaculture space as a dynamic accumulator because it does just that, but it's actually not a very nutrient-rich plant. And it's known as a green manure because if you chop and drop comfrey around all of your fruit trees, it will increase the yield on your fruit trees. And you will just literally chop and drop it right there, fresh and green, leave the leaves around the fruit tree. But the reason that it's prioritized, even despite it's not being a really high potency and nutrient, is because it's extremely bioavailable. So not all dynamic accumulators are created equal. They all can accumulate a different resource. If you live in the tropics, palm trees, for example, fix phosphate. And what they do is they work in barter and trade with the soils and the mycelium beneath the soil, known as mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi is something that I'm gonna encourage you to Google, because I don't have a slide to explain what it is, but or to give you a visual. But if you could picture a spider web up in the corner of your house, and imagine laying that down inside the soils and let it spread across your whole garden. That little white web you see throughout the whole soil base of your garden is mycorrhizal fungi. That mycelium will literally attach itself to the root structures of your vegetables or your perennials, and it will get inside the vein of the plant. And then as it extends through the rest of your garden, it will actually increase the surface area of that plant. So now it can access a whole nother level of resources and nutrients and even water. And that mycorrhizal fungi will actually transport nutrients from one area across your garden to the tree that wants it. And when it does that, it does it in exchange for sugars provided by the plant with photosynthesis. And so the plant gives the fungi sugars, and the fungi give the plant water and nutrients. So there's more to that story there, but this is your approach, tactical ecology. And the reason I say tactical is because you're going to look at this from a perspective of being very specific in your selection of the species. There are problem-fixing species that maybe repel pests. Most medicinal herbs will repel pests. There are vining species that can grow vertically up the side of your house that can produce you food in a very small space. Some folks will even grow grapevines up their fruit trees. Vining species come in a lot of different ways. You can actually find vining species that are problem fixing, like pollinator attracting, for example. If you don't have flowers in your garden, then you know one of the first things that you need to plant. Flowers don't only bring in pollinators and look pretty and make your wife happy. What they do is they bring in beneficial predators that then will eat pests. And if you don't have these pollinators, then you're not only reducing your yield because you're not getting the pollination, you probably also have an increase in pests. So look at the ecology in your garden tactically and understand what the weeds are doing. So this is what an inside of a hugelkultur mound looks like. I'm going to show you here in a second. This little graph that I have here displayed on the screen, that's a handout. It's a digital download that you can find on our website, and that will walk you through the benefits, the Q&As, the common questions that I get about hugelkultur, and the layering system for doing this and duplicating it on your own property. Now, hugelkultur is my favorite way to grow a garden in an area where it's fresh and you're just starting these concepts, because what hugelkultur does is it builds soil ecology and brings in microorganisms in a way that's just unreal. The Back to Eden method's got nothing on hugelkultur, but we use them in conjunction, right? Because we're looking at things in diversity. Hugelkultur layering system is very specifically dig down 1 foot into the soil, and then put in your hard logs, your big fallen trees and benches. The bigger the logs in your pile of sticks, you're going to want to have a batch of nothing but fallen lumber. Your firewood will work, anything you pull out of the local forest, but the more decomposed it is, the better. But the ones that are the least decomposed, you put at the very bottom, the big ones. And then you're going to work your way up in a pyramid shape up to the top of a hugelkultur bed. And hugelkultur, when it was developed, it was actually about 6 feet tall, and they would stand to harvest their lettuce off the side of this mound. What people do wrong with hugelkultur is they'll do these logs inside of a garden bed, and then they'll call it done, and they'll think that's going to work. But it doesn't work like that, because logs are primarily carbon. And so you have to add in nitrogen. Your grass lawn is about 4% nitrogen. So when you're mowing your lawn to try to replace it and turn it into a growing space, take all of those grass clippings and smash them down inside the sticks and between the logs and make contact with the greens and the browns in the bottom of your hugel bed. Add in all of the greens to be nitrogen source, because your grass is 4% nitrogen. There are composts that you can get rich in nitrogen, like chicken manure, and you can use that inside of your hugel bed. And once you get a good nitrogen source inside there around all of these logs, you're going to pack it with compost, fill that hole with compost, and that native soil that you dug down 1 foot, you're going to then layer over the top. So now you have this kind of lasagna system going on your hugel bed. And as soon as you're done putting over your native soils back over the top, you can immediately mulch that with, I like to use straw because it doesn't fall down like wood chips do on a mound. but you can plant in it immediately. So this photo of our back to Eden method garden there, and then the start of our food forest is kind of in the back corner where we did our hugel beds. That's first year growth on our tomatoes. And like I told you before, I don't water them. I didn't fertilize them. I did nothing else. We plant that, we made that hugel bed, and then you leave it alone. So this area here of the garden was our hugel culture demonstration site, and we plant that in first season. So if you've got your straw mulch and you're done with your hugel bed, you can plant in it immediately. I like to do tomatoes because they're the quickest and easiest to walk away from in a hugel bed. And something that a lot of people don't understand about hugel bed or about tomatoes is that tomatoes don't want to grow vertically. They're actually a bush and they'll fall over. And there is no, this is a cultivar of our own of generations of cross pollination to create this. But what a tomato has adapted to today as a native species, if it existed in nature, you would see it in a bush, it would fall over. And there are hairs all along the stems of your tomato plant. Every time one of those stems touches the wood chips or the soil surface or the straw, it will send out roots chasing that moisture, and then it will grab a new section to grow. So in nature, there's no single points of failure. There are redundancies. And when this redundancy happens for a tomato plant, if a vine borer or something got the main stem, for example, it would not kill the plant because all these other contact points from the main branches that are now rooted down are growing nutrient and collecting water and able to sustain the plant. So there's multiple points of contact for growth there. Now what's also cool about a tomato plant is that when this happens, you're spreading the amount of space that you're gathering nutrients from. And so if you have a really nice fertile pocket where you planted your seed, and then that tomato plant falls way over here, you might also have a different nutrient that's now depleted where you originally planted from a single stem. And so it's able to gather and collect nutrients from all over your garden space here in several feet around from where you planted the seed. And then there's some more cool tricks that you can do with a tomato here. I won't get into yet, but using that vertical space, this is an elm tree that we were really tired of because the elm trees will self-seed in wood chips from above. And so what we decided to do, instead of cutting down the elm tree because we wanted it for its medicinal values, we would grow gourds up the elm tree. And so we grew gourds all over the tree. So when you looked up, you would see these big apple-like looking structures. And for those of you that don't know what a gourd is it basically will just a big melon that hardens off, and you can turn it into cups and bowls and cool things. So that's kind of a recap on hugel culture. But the whole backbone of all of this is understanding that there's a function to the species that you're selecting. And in nature, all of these functions are happening at scale, and there's a polyculture in every single area of the natural forest. Nothing grows by itself. And so learning about polyculture is going to be a critical step for you. Now, in that digital download, there are the permaculture principles. There are the layers of a food forest and the rule of 3. And when you get into there and you start to see and explore some of that content, look at the rule of 3 and duplicate that system. The rule of 3 is your kind of the bread and butter to making a guild that's layered on the 7 layers of a food forest function. If you don't have nitrogen fixers, dynamic accumulators, things like that are also in that download list, then your guild will not self-sustain. You will not become self-fertilizing. And so when you look at it from a perspective where you're looking at the closeness and the kind of the tunnel vision of a specific element, but then stand back and understand the whole pattern of your property. Understand where the light casts, understand how the water flows across your property. How far is the garden from the hose? Do you have to have the hose? Can you get away with building your garden in a way where the groundwater can be all you need? Do you get enough rainfall in your area that you think you could mimic our systems and do this in a way that you don't need to water? Can you get into drip lines? Be tactical and specific and look at all areas of your design and protect your ecosystem. If you don't have a mulch on your garden, then the number one thing that you can do is that. Find yourself a mulch. And when you're looking at your overall design of the property, you'll realize that 90% of the areas where the most growth is naturally are the areas that are untouched, where mulch or some kind of organic matter has been allowed to develop. Now, we do this in St. George, and then in California, where there was a lot of desert drought experience going on. And so the systems that we were able to duplicate with this were very specifically enabling the water retention factor as a primary focus. And so as a kind of a rule of thumb, if you're looking at your area as a unique climate, hearing the back to Eden method, you're watching all of these things happen, then you're probably fighting some of your previous belief, because maybe all these images I showed you were in a nice growing space, and we were functioning with some really nice soils, and we could make this work in a way that was suitable for our climate, and we don't have to. Yeah, and you're not going to be capable of duplicating it because you're in a drought-stricken area. So I just want you to know that if you follow the patterns that I just showed you, and you do it in a systematic way, where when you're planting your seed, you're able to mulch right away, you're able to fertilize the soils and do the lasagna layering system, then what happens is the soil ecology builds, that mycelium, that mycorrhizal fungi begins to grow, and it becomes self-stable, because right off of the bat, you're allowing nature to take its process. And the first season, you're going to use plugs to go into your back to Eden style gardening. Now, the way that I had to rush through this just isn't normally how I like to do this. And so I'm kind of skipping through a bunch of these, because what I want to do is pause for a minute for a Q&A so I can address some specific questions from people. So the whole moral of the story of a back to Eden style garden is to mimic the forest floor, and you have a heavy mulch. The whole background behind a hugelkultur model is very specifically so that you can mimic what happens when a tree falls in nature and begins to decompose. And the whole model of a permaculture capability and doing things in a regenerative sense is so that you can tap new resources, and you can dive into areas of your personal food supply that you may not have ever dove into before. And I do it in a way by design, observing and interacting with your local environment, so that through the power of nature, your work can be taken out of the equation. My philosophy is that work is a flaw in design. And so if you step away from your garden and it dies, there's a flaw in your design. You shouldn't have to be there in order to get it to grow. And that is a common misconception with our food supply today. So if you want to take a second right now and just put some questions down inside the chat, what I'm going to do is just read through the chat, and I'm going to answer and address some specific questions, because realistically, I think that this was probably more than people were expecting to get into right off the bat. And I feel like it's going to be more comfortable if I can get one-on-one with people here. Some of the things that we're doing is also in the realm of natural beekeeping. And we do a lot with our permaculture properties, because within the realm of natural beekeeping, because if we don't have pollinators, you don't have food. And so when you're looking at your spacing of trees, for example, sometimes people will separate their trees so far that they're not touching because they're afraid of disease or other things like that. And what we'll do is we'll put the hives in the area where the trees are growing in our orchards, and then we'll put our trees so close together that the branches actually do touch, which will increase pollination. And then at the same time, our bees are able to land on one tree, and they're able to spin around that one tree. But before they've even left that tree, they're pollinating the second tree, and they don't even know it. And so we're leveraging more functions out of our hive. And so the moral of the story, and what I'm trying to convey there, is that we're using natural, local resources in a redundant way, in a way that is duplicatable and can continue to resurface and recirculate. So I do have some more stuff there, but I feel like we're getting a little drifty here. So let me see what we got here in the comments. Okay, so Sylvie says, how long does it take to detox a lawn? Ours has been treated in the past, and it's been a few years without pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides. So for detoxing a lawn, the very first thing that comes to my mind is eliminating the ecology monoculture, right? A lawn is a monoculture, and so I don't like lawns, and I'm not gonna dive into how to keep your lawn pretty or how to keep the chemicals out of your lawn so you can lay in the lawn again. But if you want to turn it into a productive food growing space, what I would do is mow it down to the soil, and then I would immediately spread over that a nice compost, and then spread over that a nice layer of chips. What will happen is the decomposing chips will neutralize the toxins. So when you come in to plant in that and you put your plugs in, about one season, give or take, you'll notice the ecology has moved up and down from the existing soil level and decomposed on the top and the bottom, which is really weird how that works. Your soil expands both ways. And inside that process right there, it's neutralizing those chemicals. And most of your soil biology has some form of purification effect. Like pill bugs, for example, potato bugs will remove heavy metals from soil. So if you have a lot of pill bugs, a lot of people will think it's a bad thing, but oftentimes that's what they're doing. And so there's some benefits there. So I would say if you did it that way, maybe one season, you could get rid of most of those things. 2 seasons if it's really, really bad. And if it was like a previous monoculture crop where it was sprayed pretty heavily, I would say maybe 3 seasons just to get yourself some clarity. So Kathy says, so Jamon, it doesn't matter if pine chips or hardwood chips. No, nope, get away from the idea that pine chips will rob nitrogen. There's a mistake in the understanding there because nothing can decompose without containing its own nitrogen. And the trees already contain enough nitrogen to decompose. And if in the effect that they do decide to decompose, like I said, they're only, or do decide that they need a little bit extra nitrogen, they're only affecting the top 2 inches of soil. So Robyn says, so when I have seedlings above the ground, can I put some mulch on you? Or can I put some mulch on? You said maybe not the first year. So seedlings above ground, I don't do wood chips unless if it's already planted, I come in with straw. And let me make an important distinction here too. Plants that are growing in nature are primarily growing in a system, right? And so there's 2 kinds of systems that our gardens function in. One of them is the field, which is annual crops. That's your things like cucumbers, tomatoes, potatoes, things like that are all annual. And then you have your perennial crops. Your perennial crops are things that grow in the forest. They like a fungally dominant soil. And the fungal rich soil is going to encourage the perennial foods to thrive. Their native soil type and their environment, and they build a relationship with the fungi. The annual vegetables will actually build a relationship with the bacteria, and so they prefer a bacterial dominant soil, just like the fields out in nature. And so when you use wood chips, you're building a fungally dominant soil. When you use straws or grasses, you're building a bacterially dominant soil. So when I do a back to Eden garden and I cover my whole space in wood chips, then what I'll do is I'll get the raised bed in, and then I'll immediately put in the hugelkultur model at the bottom of the raised bed, but I don't put chips at the top. I do straw because I want my annuals in their own soil type. And then I want to transition that slowly into perennial vegetables. And I have a recommendation for you on perennial vegetables. So I did this just to show how easy it is. If you open up your phone and you type in a perennial vegetable list, the first thing you're going to see, if that clarifies it all, maybe not, type in the Google perennial vegetable list, and it's going to give you a huge whopping list of perennial vegetables. And I don't know everybody's specific climate, and so I can't give you recommendations just broadly, but there are perennial vegetables like perennial kale, there's perennial broccoli. There are so many perennials that we just don't understand today. That's just because it's not in our conventional diet. It's believed that there are 300,000 edible species of plants that are fit for the human diet. But modern agriculture has centralized society around only 200 of them. So there's 209,000 or 299,800 species that we could be growing in our backyards. And most of the time in conventional agriculture, what happens is they'll grow it in that depleted soil. And when and there's a whole slew of things we could go into about how that soil becomes depleted. But what happens is that seed that grows in the depleted soil adapts to the environment it's growing. So even though sometimes we're getting heirloom seed, what we're doing is we're getting genetic seed that has been grown season after season, generation after generation in that environment that is adapted to poor soils. So when we put it in our backyard, it's not even looking for the extra nutrients that we're trying to give it. And so we have seed, we have solutions for you, different things like that, but that's what's happening with the redundancies. So tap into the other thousands, hundreds of thousands of plants that we can put into our property and change your diet into those species. Get out of the conventional grocery store shelf solutions for food and start to explore that realm. You'll go down a bit of a rabbit hole. So just a couple more questions here, then I think we're probably pretty close to time. So Helen says, Jamon, do you find it unnecessary to do crop rotations? Your tomato area will produce volunteers. Yep. So do you continue growing toms in that same space the next growing season? Good question. Yes and no. So what happens when you grow a monoculture is it will pull that specific nutrient, right? And so you have to rotate, because if you don't, that crop that's prioritizing that particular nutrient has already drained that space of that nutrient. It's not going to be there anymore. But I don't grow in monocultures. I grow in polycultures, and I plant in things that specifically provide a nutrient that that plant wants. One of the easiest examples of a guild system was the Native American Three Sister Guild. What it was beans, corn, and squash. And the beans will add nitrogen to the soils, and then the squash shade out the soils and keep it moist. And then the corn stalk acts as a trellis for the beans. And so this companion system was fertilizing itself, retaining moisture, and then growing in a condensed space. And so they had so many benefits coming from that. If it were a monoculture, they couldn't continue to do that season after season. But with other plants providing other biomass and other nutrients through accumulation, absolutely not. You can keep doing it in the same space just fine. And that's kind of the beauty of a hugelkultur mound, is that it's such a diverse ecology on the inside of a hugel bed that you can continue to grow a diverse plant selection on the top, and it will be able to tap into it. And for drought-stricken areas and really wet areas, the same thing happens. The woody material, the biomass on the inside of the mound or the inside of your garden bed, acts like a sponge and just soaks everything up. As soon as all of that is soaked up on the inside of your hugel bed, it holds it there. So then in the peak of the summers, for example, when everything else is drying, your plants that are in the top of your hugel bed will actually send down little sucker roots and tap into the side of the log. They'll just sit on the log. And when they're ready, they'll drink freely from the log. And they do the same thing for little nutrient pockets throughout that soil base as well. So to kind of roundabout answer your question, yes, I'll plan to get in the same spot. And yes, I believe it's unnecessary to rotate. But if you don't have a good enough ecology or a polyculture, then I would rotate. So it's kind of a depends question. So Robyn says, what's the difference between a plug and a seedling? So the way that I look at it is a seedling is something that's maybe just barely breaking the top of the soil surface. And a plug is something pretty well established where you're literally just plugging it into the soil. I don't know that there's a technical term for that or not. I look at it as if it's so fragile that when you pull it out of the growing space, whatever you're using, I like to use red Solo cups. If you pull it out of there, and the soil crumbles off, you didn't have a good enough root structure. And so it wasn't maybe ready to come out of that. And so you can typically pull a plug that's well established out of its thing and then put it right back in without losing any of that. Carlotti asks, can it work on a deck? Yeah, you can do hugelkultur inside of a raised bed that has a closed bottom. but you're going to run into some more problems because you need worms and you need some biomass and you need some of those things moving out of the earth. And so I wouldn't try it if it were me, just because I would want it to be connected to the random bugs and insects that are in the earth. But if you had a deck and that's all you have, then I would never do a garden bed without it, because you're going to be drenching that thing in water all the time. It's going to become a water hungry garden bed. And especially sometimes people will do those ones where they're up high and there's open bottoms. And what happens is the wind moves around that in a big circle in just all these directions, and wind will actually evaporate water faster than direct sunlight. And so if that's happening, you have to close the sidewalls. You've got to get the wind to minimize the wind flow around your garden bed. And that log in the bottom will help quite a bit with retaining moisture. So NC says, I have had no luck with organic seeds. Is there anything to help them germinate? So I have a trick for you. My wife taught me this. I can't take credit for this. It was really cool. What happened was she grabbed a plastic bag and a paper towel, and you put the paper towel in there. And I've done this with tomato seeds, ambrosia seeds. I've even done it with garlic. I've done it with a variety of different things. You'll put the paper towel in there and you'll spread your seeds across it, and you do 2 squirts of water and then seal the bag and walk away. Don't touch it again. Just leave it there on your countertop. And what will happen is it creates a little bit of a greenhouse effect on the inside of the bag. And we get about 100% germination rate when we do that. It blows my mind every single time. And so what you'll notice is you'll see it all germinate, and they'll start to follow the paper towel as the soil growing medium, right? And so then when we're done, we're ready to transplant it, I'll either rip the bag or I'll just pull the paper towel out, and then I'll move them with tweezers into their positions. Careful not to break the roots. But that will help quite a bit with germination. If germination is a problem for you, that's a really easy solution. So I think that's pretty much all that I have to go over with everybody tonight. And I apologize for just kind of the all over the place on all of this, but hopefully there's some gain and some beauty for those that have limited understanding of what permaculture is, and then some applicable steps that you can take. And we have resources for you to continue the education in a way where I can actually get one-on-one with you. And I offer 30-minute consults for free every Thursday. So we can deep dive into your specific situation. And you can find all that information on the links that they just posted in the chat. So I'll turn the time back over to Robyn.
Well, that is very generous of you to do 30-minute consults with people, Jamon. That is awesome. So he has a lot of resources. Where can everybody find you?
The easiest way to do it is at that link tree. The linktr.ee/Tayag events. There is a Telegram chat on that link tree there, and you'll plug in directly to our free Telegram chat, just a public domain. And I'm on there pretty regularly. That's the easiest way to access me. Okay,
so I'll have the link in the show notes. So it's Linktree, but the dot is somewhere in the middle of the Linktree. And I took a screenshot of that because it was a little bit complicated about how to go get your resources. So, but we'll put it in the show notes for those of you who are listening later or who are listening on another platform. But I love what you're doing, and it's obviously a labor of love. And that's really always impressive to me when an entrepreneur is doing something that's a passion for them that grows into being a business, and it's the best kind of business to have. So appreciate you very much, Jamon, and everybody else here as well. And Renee, Jamon's mom, I see you on here, and thanks for connecting us on that crazy Facebook post. I've just got my square foot garden, and it's what I know how to do. So you've definitely kind of blown my mind, and I'm really excited about the idea of this guild where I could plant under my trees, because that's like most of my property. So I'll ask you about that later probably. But in the meantime, you guys, next week we are going to do here on the Mastermind, we're going to talk about vertical gardening or tower gardening, or what you can do on a patio, or even some people grow inside in their tower garden. And you don't have to have a tower garden. There's other ways to do it, but that's a really easy way to do it. And it can come with lights around it. And it's not the cheapest way to garden. I think you'd be gardening for a while before you broke even. But like I said in the beginning, let's end with that too. You know, if you've been waiting for a good impetus to get started gardening, consider how you would feel about gardening if a tub of spinach were $25. If that were the case, and this has happened in countries all over the world, then you'd probably get started gardening. And I really want to encourage everybody to get started with it this year, even if it isn't perfect. Like my last year wasn't perfect. My first couple growing seasons here weren't perfect. I still feel more confidence, and I feel like I'm tweaking or fixing problems instead of starting from scratch, because it really can be daunting to get started, but it's like so many other things, right? You just get started doing it and you get better at it. So I feel, I might feel like I sort of failed the first 2 years here. I did get some food, but a lot of things were pretty lame, and I sprouted things indoors and not everything sprouted. I think we did, I'm not sure we covered, I guess you did cover, what about my organic seeds that didn't sprout? And you said that some of them you actually said a number of things that are relevant to that, but I've had that too. And then I really made a mistake this year because I sprouted indoors, and I was really proud of myself for starting on February 1st. And I had like 15 crops in this whole tray, starting everything. And then I didn't know that I needed to have it in the sun. And then one of the videos I was watching on YouTube says that if you don't put your sprouts out in the sun right away, that they'll grow spindly. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I did that in Park City too. And they were super spindly. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Well, now I know. So I'm going to get it right. And we really need to put in our first year, because the first year is kind of a learning curve, and then you get to know your property and you learn how best to add to it. But I don't think that the way people are doing it with the bottles of Roundup and the bags of synthetic nitrogen is the way that we have to do it. And I think most people just don't know that. So now you guys have a lot of exposure to a much more organic and natural and sustainable way to use whatever property you have, no matter how small it is, to feed your family. So thank you, everyone. And next week we will talk about vertical gardening in smaller spaces. Thanks, Jamon. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.